Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hiring Leaders Unplugged. I'm Brenna Lenoir, the SVP of Marketing here at CodeSignal, where we empower companies to hire, onboard, and develop top talent through skills-based assessments and innovations in AI. Today, I am thrilled to kick off this session with a leader who is reshaping how we think about talent acquisition in AI. Charles Mah is the Chief Customer and Operations Officer at GoodTime. He brings 20 years of experience in recruiting and business operations. Charles, can you introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, Brenna, for the great intro. Yeah, I mean, I've been at Good Time now as Chief Customer and Operations Officer since earlier part of this year, but I've known Good Time for quite a few years. I was advising the company since the early 2020s. And prior to that, I was leading talent at companies like Workday and SAP, really focused on customer journey, orchestration for candidates, because I have a big belief that candidates are like customers. So thank you for having me here.
Yeah, excellent. So thrilled to have you and get your unique perspective and insight. So I'm going to jump into our questions. The first one is on human-centric talent acquisition, which you've talked a lot about. So why do you believe a human-centric approach is critical to successful talent acquisition?
Yeah, great question. I think, if you look at the human-centered approach, it's all about treating people like people, right? And candidates, of course, typically are looked at as what are you going to do for me from an employer perspective, why you should join. The way I see it is in today's market is it's more important than ever to treat candidates like customers, as I shared in my intro, is that candidates, I think invariably will be spending time using your products or services, whether you realize it or not. And so
Mhm.
how you treat candidates, how you look at the process that supports candidates like customers, such as, for example, timely response, or whether it's giving quality response, or whether it's actually having a journey that's reflective of what's the needs of those candidates is really important. And so I think it's a differentiator for employers. I've seen employers that where they apply this approach have really not only have improved their hiring goals, but they've actually seen an uptick in business, particularly in high volume hiring when it's in, like, for example, a retail location or a particular branch they're hiring for.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm sure as people are going through that process, the more human-centric it is, the more representative the company it is, perhaps the faster they onboard and the more they become top performers at that company.
I agree. I think with that human-centered approach, you're also, to your point about onboarding, is you're also learning more about the candidate than just simply pushing questions and getting expected or unexpected answers, right? So when you actually look at the whole journey a candidate goes through, your goal would be is in each stage, learn about what kind of skills they bring on board, some of the realized skills, unrealized skills, but you also learn about what their aspirations are. So imagine if you had a very robotic process that basically put someone through the interviews and also put them through questionnaires. All you're learning about them is them themselves for the specific role you're searching for. But it's amazing when you start applying some human-centered approaches, such as a learn approach, you can actually learn more about the candidate, not only what their interests are for the current role, you might actually learn that they might have interest for another role. So you can build better retention when you realize that they might be applying for, let's just say, a manufacturing role, but now they're thinking about wanting to become a project manager or somebody who's a software engineer who may actually want to be a development leader. So those kind of questions can be answered through a much more, I would call, human-centric process and journey than literally putting them through answering questions A, B, and C and then determining if they're a fit or not.
You just mentioned the learn approach. Can you talk more about that and how do you apply that during the recruiting process?
Yeah, it's all part of, and I've learned this over the years when I was leading talent, is it's all about asking questions that are not about just the present, but about the future, right? So you could always ask a question about somebody of, tell me more about what you've done in your last role and tell me the six accomplishments. Tell me how you got there. A lot of the behavioral traditional questions. I like to look at it as the learn approach is really learning more about asking, what do they need? What do they want? And I'll be, upfront, like a CEO that I met years ago of a very large, I'll call it social media company, had said that his goal was to ask candidates really, what can we do for you? So when you start applying that approach, candidates start opening up about where they want to go. So you're learning more about where their journey might need to head towards. It's been proven that some of the retention challenges that a lot of companies are facing today are also situations where a candidate took the role for the today's opportunity, which comes with a dollar sign attached, such as a great offer. And then a year or two in, they realize that there's a lot of misalignments. This person either felt that the role, wasn't really what they want to do in the long term, or alternatively, the paths weren't really clear. And so if you apply the approach of learning more where that candidate wants to go, you should also assess, can you support that candidate's goals and dreams and opportunities?
Right. Oh, I love that. And I think it's hard to argue that human-centric and making sure you're getting to know the person and where they want to go in the future is the right way to do it. We also know there's this huge trend with AI right now and trying to squeeze more efficiency out of everything. So how do you balance that true, genuine human connection, but also leveraging the efficiency that AI can bring us?
Yeah, I think AI is an opportunity for us to drive efficiency, but I think with also still the ability to accomplish the human-centric needs of the candidates and also as an employer. So the way I look at the balancing act is it's not about just literally cutting out all people that are engaged in the hiring process, namely on the employer side, the recruiters, the sourcers, the candidate coordinators, also the hiring managers and interviewers. There's way too much technology today that's focused on this whole goal of how much you can reduce people involvement. And when you start doing that, the learn approach I shared starts to go backwards into a commoditized process. People are not on conveyor belts to be selected whether they're in or they're out. I can tell you, there's no doubt there's a ton of research out there, but I will tell you, it's a given that if you start declining candidates based on questions and just questionnaires and through a robotic process, you're actually going to impact your business because they don't want to buy or engage your services. So when I look at the balancing act, you have to look at AI where it's more of a journey orchestrator. It's here to help you reduce tasks that are highly administrative, but also being careful not to jump into the tasks that are administrative that are needed. So when I say that are needed, for example, AI can help you schedule faster. It can also help get meetings set up, but it shouldn't also go also into the territory where it's completely saying to the recruiter, I'm going to communicate with the candidate. So the balancing act needs to be understanding where those cutoff lines are. For us at GoodTime, where we are kind of the leader in schedule automation, but also in orchestration, we really focus around how we can ensure that the hiring managers, interviewers, and recruiters have more time to actually prepare for their questions, prepare and ask those questions we just talked about when you said, how do you really balance that whole idea of creating the learn approach to hiring? And so I think AI will increasingly creep into the territory, which I think could be a good thing where you, for example, help to consolidate information. You can help to lay out the information for interviewers and also hiring managers. But I do believe, where as any talent leader that's thinking about AI, you want to balance that to the point where you're not going to compromise that candidate experience. And that's a subjective element that every VP of TA or talent operations leader is going to have to think about.
And I'm sure it's a series of tests as well. Where that line is not clear at this stage. We have to go up against the edge, maybe you go slightly past it and then refine
That's
as
right.
we go through the process of figuring out how to implement it. I know one of your accolades is building world-class customer success teams. So can you talk about, what are the skills that you look for when you're building a customer success team?
Yeah, customer success teams have gone through a lot of, I would say, evolution over the years. So I first went into customer success back in 2020. That was time goes by so quickly. It was right after when COVID started setting in and companies were looking at flexing talent. I was with a company prior to GoodTime called iCIMS, and one of the opportunities was to grow and develop talent. And I had a back to about learn. I always expressed interest, our CEO at the time, that it was not just recruiting. I wanted to kind of combine business experience to the practice. So some of the key things I learned that really contributed to the skills I look for and the things that are important in customer success today is I heard a lot of debates about, oh, is it a advanced customer support role? So escalation management. Is it a sales role to upsell more? Or what is it exactly? Is it a hybrid? And I think it's all of the above. I think first and foremost, I think one of the key skills I look for is somebody that can help to really de-escalate issues management skills, knowing how to actually de-escalate a situation that could be heightened. And I think that's a very specific skill to actually talking and listening with the customer. I also look at somebody that is very client-centric, that also looks at a client's business goals and actually is able to create a value out of it. So I call it value realization skills are really important along the lines as well. But the key thing here that, if you really want to gel those two areas together is really strong project management and communication skills. I think otherwise you're going to be pulled in those directions constantly. And I think this is going to be the reality of customer success. Is despite, and I know quite a few customer success leaders in my peer group where it's this debate about one versus the other. I kind of look at it, how do you face the reality of today and really look at the skills that can bring those two, which is escalations and selling together as one bucket. And I think that does come down to communication and project management. If you can project manage the priorities and communicate in a very articulate way to customers on how you plan to manage them as a partner, that will be the secret sauce, I think, in customer success.
Is there a background that you look for or a way that you like to uncover those skills?
So that's a great question. We're currently looking and hiring in our CS team as well right now. I think logic would typically say the traditional recruiting method is look for the CS profile, look for somebody who's been a customer success manager at another company. I think where I pivot to is number one, if back to the skills I mentioned around project management, communication, value realization, and escalation management, if you can take those skills and really delabel the role.
Mm.
I do believe you can find some real strong talents beneath other areas in the space, such as, for example, we're in talent acquisition. So I often raise that there's a lot of parallels in operations management and even recruiting management within the talent acquisition space. Or you look for somebody who is in a project management role in HR, or you look for somebody who has project management roles in IT. So the answer is where I tend to look is yes, we will see, customer success managers apply and we do source for those, but I try to broaden kind of what I call our aperture to really looking at other areas that may also offer a difference, such as domain expertise,
Mhm.
right? I think one of the key reasons for me being in this space in CS is that really understanding what the customer needs and wants. So it's also about offsetting maybe areas that you might think are weaknesses, but they're really areas that you might want to give time for that person to grow. So I don't have the core CS background, but I was able to offset a lot of that with the understanding of the customer user and being able to balance that. So I think for us, it's really about looking as wide of an aperture as possible. It's looking at what you have, but also questioning talent that might not be part of that traditional viewpoint, but they might bring other skills to offset and being really open-minded to that.
Right. That's great. For a lot of leaders right now, retention and growth are top of mind. So how do you support career development within your teams and retain that top talent?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at it. I think there's a large company view and a small company view. I think from a larger company point of view, where I've led large recruiting teams,
Mhm.
it's really being I would call the alignment at your leadership team levels to understand the talent you have, understand your skill ontology. I love to think about, well, ontology is used a lot today from a technology perspective. But when I think about it for teams, it's really building a baseline on the kind of skills that are really working well for you today. Question yourself on a regular basis on what skills are needed, and then really looking back into the team and really communicating a lot of one-on-ones, understanding what skills they bring and how you can help them along their paths to support the goals you need and what you can give back to them, right? So that's much more of a larger company, which I call it what I owe you and what you owe me type of relationship to skills offering and career development and trialing new roles. For smaller companies, in the case of smaller teams, and today we have a smaller team at GoodTime. I think one of the key things is, and it's always hard for leaders to do, and I could improve in this area myself, which is spend a lot of time understanding and having good, high quality conversations around where an individual can succeed today, what does future success look like, and what kind of risks both you're prepared to take. Because I think any wrong move, any risk can also have bigger effects when you have a smaller team. So I think it really calls for closer conversations. In my case, here at Good Time, we do experiment a lot with, I'll call individuals who have a desire to stretch their skills.
Mhm.
So we don't lock people into like, this is your role, stay in your lane. It could create a level of confusion at times. So you want to create some clear boundaries nonetheless. But when you do that, we do have some folks on my team that are working on operations and working on customer retention goals. And we also have some folks who are also on the customer retention side, focus a lot around account management. So you want to be able to not restrict yourself, whether you're big or small. And there's different ways to do that, as I've shared before, depending on what size you are.
Right. I have found that, especially when you're in a leadership role, you need to find ways to develop the team and carve out time and opportunity for them to do that. But you also have to do that for yourself. So do you have any tricks or hacks to carve out time to continue to develop in your own role?
Yeah, it's a hard one, given limited time. I would say one of the key things for me is I love to read, but also I will say there's tons of, I would say, social material out there, whether it's through YouTube, Coursera, Udemy, and even CodeSignal yourselves, where you could take a look at really, number one, I would say aspirationally, look at what you want to be and what you want to improve on. But then also, I do think assessments are super helpful. I mean, maybe it's the HR side of me speaking out, of really understanding who you are. I think there's always a side of you believe who you are versus who you are and where the opportunities are laid out for you. So, I have been actually working on the last 6 to 8 months, really taking a look at a variety of assessments out there, in addition to, the personal stuff you can take out there. But definitely, I've had a great conversation with some of your leaders around how code signal, and this is something I think is important for all, is to really understand your current skill set, right? And what you could offer, what you plan to offer, and what you offer today. And those different areas to map out where you want to develop yourself. I think as leaders, you can't really say I've developed enough. I know it tends to be sometimes you believe you're really good at something until you watch something and then you realize that, hey, this is a gap I can develop in. And so I think for myself, it's hard to plan out time. I'm not gonna kid with anyone on that. But I love to say if you could plan out at least an hour or two a week to really do some self-reflection of some of the hurdles you face this week, and then what things you could be learning and doing to really be different, that would be huge. And I'll share openly one of the things I did this recently, which was, where clients are transforming a lot today, conflict comes up, right? It's invariant. It's a thing that happens for CS leaders. So I typically look at some of the client situations and ask myself, how would you de-escalate a conversation? How would you negotiate the best outcomes? How do you not take no as the answer? Well, there's a lot of development material out there to really work on the script, but also work on how you view things and helping you really build those negotiating skills. So that's something I've been always working on, is the negotiation side.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. It's so hard to carve out time. I have found practicing those things really helpful. So getting the assessment of where you are, understanding your gaps, and then can you
Yep.
scenario play? Can you role play and have maybe an AI supported conversation to what if I said this? How would that feel? Or maybe the outcome would be a little bit better if I took this different approach.
Well, that is an interesting point as well, is that there's so much, as in everything's been so democratized by
Mhm.
the internet nowadays that, you have to, one thing I would say is a challenge for anyone is there's so many choices of things to do. Plus AI is which is the most accurate read, or which is the piece that best reflects where you want to go. And I would say really make a gut choice sometimes, right? Take that risk, because I tend to be a bit of a perfectionist where I compare 9 different ways of looking at things. And then you try to say, all right, which is the better outcome? Well, you could paralyze yourself through that. And I think taking a stab at it and taking something that you feel good about, something that actually has signals that really relate to who you are and where you want to go. Some
Mhm.
of it's AI driven. Actually, I was playing around actually last night on some of the AI tools out there. You don't want to use 5 or 6. You want to really choose one to start. But if
Pick
you could
your
pick that
favorite.
one, you might just learn something and you build from that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone is being asked to do more with less right now.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to the candidate experience we were talking about, which is, how do you maintain an authentic, engaging experience without overtaxing the team, without asking them to be so hands-on everywhere?
Yeah, part of it is, as I shared earlier, is around candidate, I think, journey orchestration, right? It's kind of the order of operations to AI. I look at a couple of kind of pieces that come before doing the other stuff, I would call it, where people have been really caught up with, like, how do you source better and how do you, do all these amazing candidate activities to get to your perfect candidate. I look at 2 things that are really important. One is, number one, you need to understand the base case of the candidate. So whether you source them or you found them or they applied, who are they, what their skills are, rather than having a candidate go and chase all that work down and go and putting each and every candidate through a detailed questionnaire and assessment. Look at AI-driven assessment approaches, right? Could you have an assessment that actually starts creating buckets of talent that you know that you can now move very quickly through a process that now engages a much more deeper interview approach? And then that I'll call it after is the journey orchestrator. So if you think about today, I look at where recruiters spend their time. They're spending time, particularly with volumes, trying to set up interviews, doing these pre-screens just to get an understanding of the skills. Then you set more interviews, sometimes they're panels. And then at the end of the day, you have no idea which candidate has been in one stage longer or the other than you try and move really fast.
Mm.
That is, I think, the crux of what needs to be approached first to not overtax your recruiting team. So once with assessments, you understand the whole base set of what I call their key skills that are aligned to your company. You then look at kicking off that interview process. And I think having orchestration, and this is something we focus a lot on, is to be able to basically auto schedule as quickly as you can, but also anticipate things like reschedulings or who's interviewing more than others and load balancing, and also understand the pass-through rates from stage to stage really cuts the recruiter's time down needing to be in the admin activities, but more focused on giving the update to the hiring manager. Imagine saying, look, we got 10 candidates from 20, and those 10 have these core skills aligned. We are now moving them through the interview process. And by the way, two of the interviewers had to, skip out because they were sick or had a family commitment, but, the Plan B candidates are now in. And then on top of that, all your candidates are in each stage no longer than 3 days. And maybe there was one candidate that was for 7 days and it was due to scheduling logistic challenges. That kind of readout really superpowers the recruiter to give much more a business presence to the hiring manager and the interviewers versus trying to juggle all these pieces on their own.
And I'm sure it strengthens that relationship and that trust between TA and the hiring manager when you feel
Oh,
you really know exactly where everyone is and the context for how they're moving through.
absolutely. I mean, the thing that I know I didn't enjoy when I was a recruiter back in the day is, you're giving an update and you're only trying to guess what the hiring manager is going to ask you. So you have like a ton of information. You're trying to shuffle through it, trying to understand what happened. And it's hard, particularly today when there's more candidates than ever. So the idea to really, I call it autopilot your experience really from the base skills to the interview journey and really giving clean readouts is a way of really building that tight partnership with the hiring teams.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot about human touch and integrating AI. So for talent acquisition leaders, what is your advice as they start to integrate AI, but also want to keep that high touch?
Yeah, I think I use word order of operations. You can't do everything at once. Everyone I know is trying to move as quickly as they can to really build trust and support from their executive teams. I'd say really take a project management lens and look at number one, your process. You can't overlay AI or anything on top of an existing process because that process was not designed for AI. So you want to look at a process, the journey you want to create, what you're trying to accomplish. Like I said, if I use the last example, you want to look at a process of collecting your data for assessments. Number two, how do you want to kick off interviews from screen to panel? So when you lay out that process, you then look at where the people in your team are engaged in, how they're engaged. So when I think about human centric, it's here to support the people, not just the candidates as people, but your staff. And so once you drive what kind of efficiencies you're looking for and where your team members are aligned to which steps of the process, you then want to apply systems on top. That's where the AI comes in. That's where you can design the orchestration to really fit the process and the people you have on your team. So I look at it as a 1, 2, 3 approach. It is a little bit more lengthier than doing something in 2, 3 weeks of trying to implement. But when you take this approach, you're actually building a long-term view of AI, but also building the right efficiencies that are important for you to showcase back to leadership, but also creating the best in class experience for your candidates.
Yeah. It sounds like the first step is just to make sure you understand and have mapped out all the stages and have really solid project management and orchestration. Are there other unique strategies that you use to find great cultural and skill fits for good time?
Yeah, I think one of the things I think it's important is really widening the aperture. So I like to look at everyone looks at skills as a defined term. So for example, value realization, that's a broad term I just used. It can mean different things in different companies. So I would say rather than trying to take a standardized view, try to apply, I would call it like code signal to looking at what are those baselines that you want to look at what represents you, right? So good time is not the same. I mean, despite we have competitors, like-minded companies out there, the word value realization is going to mean different across the board. So number one is really identify the baseline. Number two, also, I think a good time we look at, what I call the risk. I could say risk tolerance is that when you start looking at skills beyond what you're currently looking for the role today, is what's your appetite for risk? I think for us, it's a difference between hiring more people, which is important, but you got to hire only the right amount of people, not overhire, to also looking at the skills you can stretch and support your internal talent. So those are the two big pieces I think that I like to think that we at GoodTime think about. Not only can we attract the right people who are a common fit with us from a values to skill perspective, but also can we offer opportunity for existing skills to and existing talent to advance themselves.
I love that. That's great. We are approaching the end of our 30 minutes together. So my final question for you, is there any other wisdom you want to share with us?
Yeah, the key wisdom is, there's a lot of change going on. And I
Mhm.
know there's a lot of debate about, change management, or do you just go in and just do it? I would say really when you're feeling like things are heating up and a lot of AI and a lot of process work, it could be a lot and overwhelm teams. You asked about overtaxing teams. You can actually overtax not on the work of today, but also trying to apply transformation. Is sometimes just stop, drop, and pause, right? One of my former bosses, who was the chief people officer of a large telecom company, said to me once, I want everyone to stop, drop, and pause, not just keep on forging forward or not trying to over pivot. Just stop, drop, and pause. Look at what the goals are. Look at what you're doing. Does it still align with the goals that you had set forth? And then looking at what kind of change is going to happen in the organization. I like to look at versus change management with more training and more discussion, but more about, is the organization prepared? So that's the real question, because if they're not prepared, no matter how much training you're going to do, they're not going to be able to move forward. So you got to look at that kind of sequence of things where you want to look at, are you still aligned to what you had set forth to do? And is the organization really in agreement and alignment to making those shifts? And if yes, then you continue forging forward. That's where all the training and all the different things come into play. But if not, then you might want to look and reevaluate your goals again, and then looking at where do you need to do pivots and I'd say tweaks to the plan that you had in place. But I always think about people are at the center, because I think there's just so much talk about, putting the team members and candidates into this like very robotic process. I think it's important to really apply the human touch to the experience.
Absolutely. Stop, drop, and pause. I'm gonna remember that one. I think it's a great mantra.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, this incredibly insightful conversation. I hope everyone's walking away with new ideas on how a human-centric approach can truly transform talent acquisition and customer success. And if you're thinking about your own hiring and development strategies, I'd love to mention that we've just launched AI Interviewer for customer success and support. If you'd like to hear more from us or Charles, you can follow us on social or visit codesignal.com or goodtime.io. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.